We're getting old, Tim. We didn't need to fill that full.
Thank you. Okay.
Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for many blessings. We're thankful for the opportunity to live in this lovely town, in a beautiful part of Alberta. We pray that Spirit may be with us, and the decisions that we make will be wise ones. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And thank you all for being there. We have our media today. Thank you, Corey, for being there. And we have our delegations there today. So we have Dr. Lloyd Clark, who will address us, and we have...
It will be here. No, here he is.
No, our... we have us.
This is Lance.
Lance.
Yeah, sometimes I wish I was a doctor.
You look like Lloyd. You wish he had his money, eh?
Well, let's really have created another person out of you.
Yeah, that's good.
But you're doctoring everything that we're doing here, so it's good.
You'll have to grow a beard to look like Lloyd, though.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to call the meeting to order, and we have an agenda we need to adopt. So, Councillor Selk, thank you. Any additions to that agenda?
I would like to add I just need 2 minutes to talk about one of the communities in Bloom has asked me to
Okay, so
something.
when we have the committee report, you will be able to do that right there, so we don't need to add it to the agenda. All in favor? Thank you very much. All right, now we have Ryan and Lance that will present to us the old Man River Regional Services that you're providing to the town. So thank you so much. And Lance?
Turn this slide off again.
I'm happy you're there. We have planned for about 15 minutes and then questions. I looked at your presentation. I think what would be very beneficial, especially because we have new councillors, is to really understand the value added that you bring to the town through your services, and how beneficial it is for us to be part of OSC rather than flying on our own.
Okay. And vice versa too. Beneficial it is for
I think there is something there that will be of importance to our council. Thank you. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. Thank you, Mayor, Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I will probably take about 5 or 10 minutes of your time, then I'll turn the presentation over to Ryan. He has a bit more information that's probably more pertinent to planning. Okay, so I'm here to talk a little bit about who we are and the services we provide and how you fit into that big scheme of things. So I guess to start with, my name's Lance Kuiper. I'm the director of ORSC, and I've been there for about 12 years. And our organization, as a commission, has been in existence for about 70 years. In its current form, it is, I guess, put together in about 1995. Right, so prior to 1995, all the communities in southern Alberta were mandated to belong to a commission. The commission, at that point, made decisions on behalf of the towns, like we were the subdivision authority, etc. And that was a model that didn't work that well. So the province, in its wisdom at the time, shut down the commissions and pushed planning onto individual municipalities. Right, so it became your purview instead of a larger groups. And that's a fairly good model to have. In southern Alberta, most of the small towns unfortunately couldn't afford to have their own planning departments. And so we rejigged our operations and we came up with a commission structure. And we asked the municipalities that we were doing work with at that time if they would like to continue with that. However, decisions would be made locally instead of out of Lethbridge. And we were fortunate enough to have a good majority of our municipalities stick with us and sign on, Cardston being one of those at the time. Today, we have 41 members. Okay, so ORSC, the commission is owned by the members, so Cardston is a part owner of ORSC. And we have a board of directors that oversees our operations. Dennis sat on our board for the past few years, I believe, 4 probably.
2.5.
2.5,
something like that.
right, and Richard is our new board member for the upcoming session. So each municipality has a board member. That board elects an executive that oversees our operations on a daily basis. So they meet once a month, and they pour over the budgets and help us plan our activities for the municipalities. So each community has a contract with us. Cardston has one that was put together in 1995. And in it, it stipulates and shows the work that we do for you as part of that membership. And it also stipulates some of the fee-for-services we have for extra types of work that we do. So I'll leave a copy of this with Jeff as well. Currently, Cardston pays a fee of $25,850 to us for planning services. And you also pay a GIS fee because you partake in that service. It's a separate service, but we do GIS mapping on behalf of the town. That fee is $18,795 per year. And then we also offer a regional assessment review board service, so that's for people that have complaints about their assessment. And that fee is $250 a year to partake in that particular service. We have been down here before to hear a few assessment complaints as well. Richard?
This is assessed per population, right?
The membership fees for planning are total equalized assessments. And then we apply a mill rate to that and sort of requisition from the communities a certain amount of money for us to operate. So to date, we raise about $930,000 from our municipalities to maintain operations. So of that, you have a $25,000 share. The GIS fees are done on a per population basis, Richard. So that's a little different structure. And then the assessment one is basically just an administrative fee to maintain some files. And then as you have an assessment, you would pay for that particular assessment for board members, et cetera, to partake. We do have a strategic plan as well. So the things that we offer our municipalities are land use planning. We like to split them into current land use planning, so we handle subdivisions, for instance, on your behalf. And we offer advice on development related issues. So Noel would be in touch with Ryan on a fairly regular basis for interpretation of the land use bylaw, that sort of stuff, in his day-to-day activities. We also do long-term planning, so we write the land use bylaw and any of the statutory documents that you require under the Municipal Government Act. So the Municipal Development Plan, for instance, is written by our office, but it's with input always from council and from the Municipal Planning Commission and from your stakeholders and ratepayers as well. We will be embarking on another group of plans largely brought about by the new changes to the Municipal Government Act. All municipalities are now mandated to have an intermunicipal development plan with their adjacent jurisdictions. So in your case, you will have a plan with Cardston County. And some municipalities already have these things in place, but some don't at this point. Is there one for here, Ryan?
Yeah,
there is
an older one.
Right, so what we'll do is review your older one and make sure it falls into compliance with the new requirements. And
There's a little bit of work to be done there.
Yeah, it's probably a considerable amount. We have a window of about 2 years for making that happen. The other thing we do are area structure plans, and I know we've done that for a portion of the town towards the west a number of years ago. We do area redevelopment plans. We've also done some trail plans. Ryan just finished a trail plan for the town of McGrath, for instance. That was jointly done with Cardston County. So we try to dabble in anything land use related. Our office is also currently the repository for about 70 to 80 years worth of subdivision files, so land files. And those are all sort of hard copy maps and decisions and a bunch of other things that sort of take up a lot of space. And we are I guess, in the process of turning them into digital files. We're scanning them in, and then we will make them accessible to the municipalities through our GIS program. Okay, so it's sort of dragging us from one century into the next there. It's also a good way to manage some risk. Should we have a water damage or fire, all those valuable documents would be gone. So that's a big project we're undertaking currently as well. We're also looking into subdivision development appeal boards and creating a regional model for that to exist. There are a number of new changes that the province has asked for that to occur, so in the next couple of months we'll be rolling out something there as well. And that's probably about it for me. I'll turn the rest of the presentation over to Ryan. He's going to talk a little bit about subdivision and development and some of the more direct services that we do for the town. I don't know if there's any questions you have about Orsk itself, or about the budgets that we have, or the fees that we charge you, or...
Essentially, I think what we need to understand is the value we have in the services that you offer, that we as a community could not be able to afford unless we are part of a greater regional organization as ours.
Right, there is a monetary value. Of course, for $25,000 you have access to not just Ryan, but an entire planning staff of about 9 planners currently. So the continuity's there, the expertise and the longevity, a lot of history throughout the years, comes with that $25,000 a year charge. To have your own planning department, for instance, would probably be closer to $200,000, and a lot higher should you add GIS into the mix as well. And that just doesn't make sense for the majority of the municipalities down here. So, once again, we're impartial as well, so, we...
No, I mean, I totally understand. I understand there are some, like, which one is the latest that has gone on their own solo? Is that Coldhurst or Coaldale? Coaldale, I think.
No, we're still...
You still partner with them?
Yep, yeah, the only one, we had Rocky Mountain House leave our GIS program.
Oh, okay, so that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's just the GIS program, and they're in the Red Deer area. They were never meant to be with us for a long-term relationship.
Okay, so that's what it is, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Councillor Bengry, you wanted to ask a question.
You twitched my thinking here, Lance, when you said you have a storage vault for land titles?
Not for land titles, but for subdivision files. All right, so every time a subdivision is done, the decisions, all the maps that pertain to that, the surveys are all held in our office on your behalf. Right, so those are valuable documents. Yeah, and we've had to...
You go way back?
Way back.
70 years.
Sometimes more than that. We have a few older files from...
I might come see you early next Thursday night.
Are there questions from council for Lance? Does it help you understand a little bit the services that are given to the town? And I must say, when we did the municipal development plan, I was very happy to have somebody of us be there and help us to maneuver through the difficulty that it represents. I mean, it's quite a difficult thing. And I would imagine the future is even more complex.
Yeah, it is, with all the changes that are coming from the provincial government. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done.
So here's a question for you. Because we have a land use bylaw that was drafted about 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, last year, I think.
Last year. So here is what I'm wondering, because of the changes to the MGA, how far down the queue are we to work towards a revision?
There is a 2-year window to have those revisions in place to comply, and I would suggest, because your land use bylaw is so new, that there will be relatively small adjustments that will need to be made. One of the big things is that it's in compliance with the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, and this would be already, right? So it's just a few minor tweaks and amendments, and we'll certainly be able to handle those on your behalf.
Maybe, Lance, if you wanted to help us a little bit navigate that hierarchy of plans that we have and documents that we have to be really connected to and in harmony with.
Right.
So if you could maybe,
Have an inventory of those.
help us with that. If you can maybe speak to it. We have, let's start from the very top, the MGA, then the South Saskatchewan.
Yeah, South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, and there are 7 of those plans throughout the province. Unfortunately, there's only 2 of them done to date, and
Right.
one of them is in contention with the courts right now in the north, so there's really only one that's active. So
Which
we
is
have a little bit of a different playing field than the rest of the province.
So you have the intermunicipal.
Yeah, then you have your MGA, right, that dictates how things are run. There's a planning section in there. We have our municipal development plan. Then we have IDPs, intermunicipal development plans, right? So those will be also tweaked to make sure they're in compliance. Then there's ICFs, which are a brand new thing, intercollaborative frameworks that have to be done. It's basically an inventory of your shared services with your neighbors. And we're not anticipating that to be a big rollout for us to do, but we're prepared to do that as well for the municipalities. Okay, so some of these things have a 2-year window, some have a 3-year window, and we're just in the planning stages right now of getting that mapped out for all the communities.
Right. In other words, anything that is done at the level of the municipality has to be in harmony.
Yes,
or
with the
falls
plan above.
under the umbrella of what's above it.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Any other questions? No?
Okay, I'll turn it
Well-
over to Ryan.
Thank you, Brian. If you want to come and do a little bit of your presentation.
Sure.
Thank you, Len.
Yep, thank you very much. And maybe while Ryan's setting up, I did bring a little handout that's sort of the who, what, when, why, and where.
Oh, sounds
Right,
good.
so things that I might have missed are on there.
Thank you.
Should we only find this
Yeah,
one
the same.
here?
Thank you very much.
Let's go to sleep.
Just for information.
Let me see here. Give me a second. Yeah, nice.
So the presentation you're going to do for us, Len, is the PowerPoint
Yeah,
presentation of all the different.
if
Breaking
time
down.
permits.
Okay.
If you're in a rush
See what we
here.
can do. There is, we have another delegation in about 10 minutes,
6
so.
o'clock, isn't it? You've got 40 minutes.
Oh,
40
it's
minutes.
6
Got lots of
o'clock?
time. Yeah.
Okay, all right, so we're good, we're good.
We'll still be
Time.
quick. We'll try to still be
Okay,
quick.
we're good. There's probably something we already discussed at
Okay,
this point.
we're just trying to figure out the remote here, I think.
Okay. Should we bail it up and let's see if you can get this started. It's on. See if you can just get one going if it wakes up.
Ryan, you have been with the town for about 3 years now, 2 years?
Just over
3
3 years.
years, I think, right, when we started to work on
Yeah, yeah, it's about that.
the document, yes.
Scroll it?
Pull it down, yeah.
Okay.
Or that button will work too, whatever works.
Okay.
Yeah, we normally just run
Gotcha.
it down like that.
Okay, thank you. Again, my name is Ryan Dick, and like the mayor mentioned there, I've been with the town for just over 3 years. And in addition to working with the town, I also work with the town of McGrath, the village of Nobleford, Vulcan County. Each planner at Orsk has their own community assignments. That's how we sort of set things up there. And I'm from southern Alberta originally as well. So this is a bit of an overview of what I'm hoping to talk about today. And some of it will skim over a little bit. If you want to stop me at any time or have questions or delve into anything in more detail, we can do that now, or of course I'm happy to come back at any time, should you like me to come down here. All right, and this is, Len sort of set up a framework for some of this stuff, but we'll start with the question as to why we plan. And you all know that we have a land use bylaw. Every community in Alberta has to have a land use bylaw. The land use bylaw regulates land use and development. It's your day-to-day document that dictates what you can and can't do in the community. As the mayor mentioned, we recently updated the bylaw for the town last year, and I think we came up with a very good product here that's going to serve the town for the next good while. Prior to the amendments to the first, or I guess the second stage of amendments to the Municipal Government Act, municipalities with a population of 3,500 or more had to have a municipal development plan. So that's recently changed, and now every community has to. So we're right on the cusp of that 3,500 range, although the town has had a municipal development plan voluntarily for a long time prior to that. So that's a recent change. All the little guys now have to have them too. Some of the other documents, again, as Len's mentioned, the Municipal Government Act, the document that you don't see as much of maybe is the subdivision and development regulation. Pertains more to subdivision, which of course we handle on your behalf for the most part. There are some stuff that pertains directly to development permitting, but more so to do with subdivision there. It states things like a requirement to set back certain developments from your wastewater treatment plants, setbacks from highways. It sets forth appeal requirements for when the province is going to deal with an appeal, say for a subdivision, things like that. The regional plan, as we already mentioned, we have a regional plan. The South Saskatchewan area, these are to do with the watersheds, the water basins, and so this is really in and around the Calgary region and everywhere south. And of course, there's a ton of other provincial documents, acts, and regulations that pertain to planning and have influence on land use planning, and those are just a few of them there. Okay, so at the provincial level, there are a few different bodies there on the left that land use planning is done for certain types of matters at the provincial level, and sometimes exclusively at the local level, and a lot of times there'll be a provincial component and also a local component, and that's where things can sometimes get confusing here. For example, big things like power plants, like wind farms, solar farms, which we're seeing a lot of lately. You'll see an approval by the Alberta Utilities Commission, but the municipality will also be able to regulate, at least to some degree, some matters, at least the matters that the province didn't deal with directly. At the local level, which is most pertinent for you guys, of course, municipal council, you have a development authority and you have a subdivision authority. Most municipalities lump these together into a municipal planning commission, which is what you have here, but sometimes they are separated. You do have a development officer here who has some development authority powers, and the municipal planning commission has some of the other development authority powers. And that's typically how most communities in the region set things up. And then you have an appeal board. You have to have an appeal board. You guys have a local appeal board. Some places use an intermunicipal appeal board. As Len's mentioned, we are now looking at a bit of a regional model because the appeal board requirements have changed recently. Okay, starting with the subdivision authority. The Municipal Planning Commission is the subdivision authority for the town, but it doesn't have to be that way. And a lot of places maybe don't realize that you do have a fair amount of flexibility in how you set this up. So the Municipal Government Act envisions two separate processes for subdivision and for development. And they are different, and they are distinct intentionally. Sometimes confusing as to, is this requirement for subdivision or is it for development? But your staff and ORSC is here to help you with those kind of things.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
On that slide, if you just go back, as a composition or sum of council, right now we have councillor designated to be part of that body. But I know there are around us some towns that decide to have the whole council deal with it. For example, Raymond has that, the county has that. What do you see as an advantage or an inconvenience of doing work in those different manners?
Yeah, it's fairly typical for the rural municipalities to do that. They'll often have, say they'll have 6 of the councillors sit as the subdivision authority, one guy will sit as the appeal board member. And that seems to work well for the rurals. Maybe that's trouble getting people involved. And for the urbans, I'd say the typical model is similar to what you guys do. You have a few councillor representatives and then lay people. And I think that does work well in that, I mean, there's 2 components maybe. You can get the benefit of, say there's professionals in the community that have experience with this type of thing, say planners or engineers, lawyers, surveyors. They might be good people for the board, for the planning commission. The other consideration is that, being the decision-making body for development and subdivision, if you I guess there's potential for political influence or those types of things to get in the way of objective and impartial decisions that the MPC has to make. So that would be one other consideration.
Okay, thank you.
The other issue would be if it was all council, then you couldn't have a councillor on your appeal board as well, so that would have to be made up entirely of lay people. Right? So there might not be then some continuity between the discussions that happen here with the appeal board.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's nice to have a little bit of a mix.
Okay, thank you.
Again, the Development Authority, we sort of talked about this. In your case, the Municipal Planning Commission does both. And Nolan does permitted uses and a portion of the developments, depending on what it is. The more contentious type applications requiring variances, come to the Municipal Planning Commission. They get the benefit of a collective body for discussion and stuff like that. The appeal board, now the appeal board requirements have recently changed, and you see how it used to be that you could have more than one councillor as long as they didn't form the majority. Now you can only have one councillor. This has been something that the intermunicipal boards that we have in the region, there's a few of them, are going to struggle with because they're going to have to change their bylaws now, and they won't be able to have, say, a councillor from Coots, Milk River, and Werner. You can only have one councillor, and the interpretation from municipal affairs is that even though you're a councillor in Coots and the appeal might be in Milk River, you're still technically a councillor, which is something we sort of questioned when they were doing these changes, but that's been the interpretation. All right.
So Nolan wouldn't sit on the appeal board?
No, he wouldn't be eligible to be. That's right.
No, that other counselor wouldn't be somebody from the MPC as well. It would be another.
That's right. It's a new hearing, and they have the benefit of a totally new panel. Yeah. So this gives you the flow chart of, like we were already talking about, the hierarchy of plans and how the plans have to be consistent with one another. You start from the province and your regional plan, and then down through your local plans. I already got into this a little bit, but this talks about matters mostly to do with subdivision and subdivision considerations, and also stuff where the province has an interest. Again, where the province will take jurisdiction on appeals, where it's close to a highway, or anything where there's a deemed provincial interest. That's largely what the subdivision development regulation does. It also talks about timelines, application requirements, reasoning, that sort of thing. The Alberta Land Stewardship Act was proclaimed in 2009. This is what set up the regional planning areas that Len's mentioned. And you can see down in the map there, the bottom, South Saskatchewan area is the most populated area of all the regions. And it is only two regions that have regional plans currently. The province is way behind on the rollout of this stuff, and there was the questions for a while, would they even stick with ALSA? Would they move to repeal it? The NDP certainly won't, but should there be a change in provincial government, who knows? So the SSRP came into effect in 2014. This was after a long process of consultation with municipalities, stakeholders prior to. So municipalities have a 5-year window within which we have to file a statutory declaration saying that we comply with the regional plan. We have to say that we've went over all our documents, statutory plans, non-statutory documents, and we now are consistent with the regional plan. If you've ever looked at this document, there are a lot of sort of statements you'd expect to be in there, sort of motherhood and apple pie, things we could all agree about. There's some more contentious stuff. I'm going to show you some of the stuff here that pertains maybe most directly to you. And there's a lot of words up there. I don't expect you to read it, but the SSRP did come up with some fairly clear statements about housing, population, and density, and how municipalities are expected to develop at a higher density than previously. They were very clear about that. The thing is, the regional plan does not quantify exactly how much. It's up to municipalities to decide, have we taken steps or measures to comply with the plan? Are we going to develop at a higher density? And what suits the Cardston context might not suit the Coaldale context, right? So, I think when this regional plan first came out, municipalities were fairly worried what this would mean for them. From what we've seen so far, it's largely up to you to say, okay, this is a long-range policy document. We have to consider it, but ultimately we retain autonomy. We get to decide what we want to do. We just have to move toward the policy direction that's been set here.
I didn't understand the Montana bit.
This graphic's been around forever. This is a presentation that a few of my colleagues have also used, so I can't take credit for putting this particular one in there.
Well, I'm pointing somewhere anyways.
That's
He
the
wants it
point.
here, she wants it there.
The point is to say there isn't any land use plan. Maybe that's in the northeastern areas of the state, I don't know.
That makes perfect sense.
I like that.
Yeah, glad you like that.
Home, the pain in the countryside.
This is sort of reiterating stuff we've already touched on, but the hierarchy, the plans provide policies, whereas the land use bylaw is the regulatory document that implements the policies. So that's maybe one takeaway, is you have the statutory plans, and they set the table for the land use bylaw, which is really the binding document that you use for your day-to-day decision-making, setbacks for buildings, lot sizes, which land uses can go where, that type of thing. In the intermunicipal development plan, you can see that's the cover page of the existing document you have from about, I don't know, is that 10 years ago or something, Jeff?
And not the cartoon on the left.
Not the cartoon on the left, no. Again, these are now a mandatory requirement. If you think of it, working with Cardston County now is going to have to come up with, I don't know if those guys, if they 7, probably more like 12. Because they also have to do it with their rural neighbors, not just the urban. So the rural municipalities really have a big workload with this new requirement. They have to do it with the rural neighbors and all the urbans in between. So you think of one for McGrath, one for Hillspring, one for Glenwood, one for the town of Cardston. So they're a bit overwhelmed with some of this stuff. Yeah.
Ryan, where you're dealing with the county, and county is on the ORSC board, how do you deal with people like Nature Conservatory and City of Calgary, where they're dealing with that wetlands and the reserve? How do you deal with those kind of things?
Well, I think that's one thing about ORSC is we research and regional trends, provincial direction, that sort of stuff, and try and research it on behalf of our member municipalities. So I think that's one of the benefits. We kind of provide the regional perspective. So on specific stuff like that comes up, say it's the NRC buying up all the land in the Waterton area or whatever, we try to help our municipalities in looking at that stuff and provide an opinion.
See, they have a contract situation, I think, where they cannot subdivide that land. Once Nature's Conservancy comes in and buys that land and then leases it back or whatever they do, that owner cannot subdivide that land now.
Yeah, that's usually in the conservation easement, that's what you're going to get. They basically want to sterilize the land.
Yeah.
So for places like the MD of Pincher Creek, Cardston County down in there, that is matter for them.
Okay.
Yeah, I would suggest, though, that when we do these plans, there's a large public consultation component, and the Nature Conservancy usually comes and attends those meetings, so we do get input back and forth with them, on where things are going.
You were talking about housing density here a couple of slides back, and the province is pushing it that way. We're basically talking about new subdivisions, not what exists within a town already, aren't we? Or are we? We've got
Yes.
people in town here that own huge, massive lots. A few years ago, when I was on previous council, they tried to create some kind of cul-de-sacs there, and there was a lot of kickback on that. You don't see the province trying to legislate that and force us into smaller.
No, I mean, for those that have existing lots, existing developments, this would have no bearing on them. But for new proposals that maybe involve historical lots, large lots, I mean, this is one thing, we had this conversation when we redid the land use bylaw. We established maximum lot sizes, which is fairly unique in most of the land use bylaws in the region. We had said, what's the biggest lot size we want to see in the town of Cardston? And I have this conversation with McGrath all the time too, because they've got the same kind of historical settlement pattern. And what density is reasonable and makes sense in order for us to be able to economically provide both hard services, sewer, water, and also your soft services like your library, like your pool. You have to, stuff like that. You have to get a certain amount of assessment back for it to make sense. And what we often see, and this is where you see these conflicts between urban and rurals, people want rural living in an urban setting, or close there too, and that's why these fringe areas on the outskirts are always the subject of development pressure and differing opinions. So that's what these IMDPs attempt to do, is plan in the fringe areas. And sometimes that'll be a mile corridor all around the town boundary, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be whatever the municipalities want to agree to. Nobleford, for example, because they got all the feed lots down in Lethbridge County, they got it for almost 5 miles west and southwest because of the prevailing wind direction there. So it's always going to be a custom solution, and depending on the relationship with the councils, it might be quick and easy and amicable, or it might be drawn out over 2 years and with mediation, that type of thing. We've seen it both ways. Municipal development plans. As mentioned, we recently redid our municipal development plan. That's about 2.5 years ago, something like that. And this is sort of the long-range planning guide for a community. It's going to deal with future land use and a multitude of things that it has to address. But again, it can be very detailed and more prescriptive, or it can be more just kind of general policy driven, and to meet the minimums of the Municipal Government Act isn't too hard. So it's a custom solution for what the municipality wants. These were formerly called general municipal plans that the Regional Planning Commission used to do for all our members. But you guys are in good shape in the fact that you have a recently prepared MDP and land use bylaws. So compared to a lot of other places out there who are now scrambling because they have to get all these plans done, you guys are in fairly good shape. Area structure plans. So these are plans that are done for a specific area. It could be a small 5-acre area, could be a big chunk of the community, like you see here with the West Cardston Area Structure Plan, which is about 10 years old. This plan in particular was done by our office, as you'll recall, in 2007. I mean, the economy was in a different position. The numbers we were doing for subdivision in 2007 are probably about 5 times more than what we've been doing on average in the last few years. And a lot of communities still have lots on supply from 10 years ago. There was such a push back then, and subdivision was just going crazy. Anyways, an area structure plan deals with a more detailed plan that's generally going to have a land use concept, a subdivision layout, density requirements, transportation routes, those kind of things. So this plan has come up a fair bit since I've been working with the town, and, do we need to relook at this? Is it still reflective of what we want to see on the west end? There's been a lot of landowner changeovers. There's been a bit of subdivision activity, but for the most part, we haven't seen this plan materialize so much. And I don't think that's because it's a bad plan. I think, again, it's because the economy has shriveled up a bit, and we've got a fair amount of lots on supply.
It was done in 2007 when I was on council.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, area redevelopment plans are plans for, like the name suggests, for the redevelopment of areas. You often see these for the redevelopment of downtown areas. In the graphic, there's the redevelopment of a resource extraction use, a gravel pit. And the East Cardston area redevelopment plan was done, I believe, just a year or two after the West area structure plan. And there was already a bit of development and subdivided lots out there, so we chose to call it the area redevelopment plan. It could have probably been called the area structure plan either way. The requirements under the Act are largely the same. There are some specific stuff exclusive to redevelopment plans, like the ability to charge a levy and those kind of things for redevelopment that are often used for downtown redevelopment. So those are two types of statutory plans that are just for finite areas, not for the whole municipality. Here's an image of these area redevelopment plans for downtowns. Often come with design controls or suggestions as to how something can look aesthetically. And you guys, I always say, and I mentioned it to Lenz when I came in, you guys have a great downtown. I think one of the best ones in the region for all our smaller communities, and that you don't see much for storefront vacancies. It always feels fairly active. Of course, you have what is maybe both the benefit and the limitation that comes with the provincial highway. But it does, to me, it always feels like there's a sense of place there. And that's what you want to try and do with the downtown. You want to make it a memorable reflection of the area, of the town, a place people want to be. And I think you do have that. Could it improve? I'm sure it could. I know you've had a few recent approvals, like the one we had the other week there, the KFC we dealt with. Stuff like that. Seems like there's an interest and there's an energy to the downtown. In detail here, the land use bylaw, it breaks the community into zones or districts, residential, commercial, industrial, that type of thing. It's the implementation document again. One of the big things is the permitted and discretionary use categories. The permitted use, the thinking is that a permitted use is a use that's relatively innocuous. It's not going to cause land use conflict. It's something you'd expect to see, say, a single-family dwelling in a residential district. Whereas a discretionary use is a use that might be appropriate depending on the context, depending upon adjacent land uses, all those types of things. So that's why we use those two categories, and that's everywhere in Alberta does that. They have that dichotomy of permitted and discretionary. Again, in your case, discretionary uses typically go to the Municipal Planning Commission, who deals with those development permits. And here's just an illustration of how you break the community down into districts, and that, of course, is the town on the right there, and all the different colors illustrate different districts. You'll have districts like an agricultural district, or sometimes an urban reserve district that is sort of a holding district that keeps lands, saves them from certain types of development until they're needed for urban type of development. Maybe allows extensive cultivation or something like that, and preserves them from premature development until they're needed for more urban density. Okay, I'll keep going here with the subdivision process. Subdivision, as you probably know, is the division or separation of a parcel of land. You obtain separate titles for each parcel of land. The subdivision process is overseen a little bit more by the provincial requirements, whereas development is more within the purview of the municipality to control. The subdivision process. Subdivision, oftentimes, sometimes someone looking for subdivision will come to the town office. The town will refer them to me, or Nolan will have a conversation with them, give them, this is what you can probably do, but they'll end up coming to our office, setting up an appointment oftentimes, or just doing it over the phone. And we'll get the process going. A lot of times they require a surveyor to be engaged at the start. Sometimes they don't need it till later. Once an application's filed, we have 60 days to deal with to make a decision on an application. We have to send it out for referrals to adjacent landowners, utility companies, provincial agencies, all that stuff. It's a process that's fairly clear and sophisticated, and our office handles all those referrals and all that stuff for you guys. Yeah.
So once you approve someone, is it you who then sends the letter to the businesses to let them know that this has been approved?
Well, with subdivision, so there's a difference between development and subdivision. With development, say for a discretionary use, no one will always send out a notice. This has been approved, and they can appeal if they like.
Right.
They can appeal the decision, positive or negative. They can appeal a condition. Subdivision is different in that adjacent landowners don't have the right to appeal. They don't have the right to appeal. This changed with when the Planning Act was consolidated in the Municipal Government Act. They found, and the Provincial Planning Board was dealing with all the appeals. Most of the appeals they were getting were more to do with development, which was to come later on. So now, currently, an adjacent landowner can submit a concern when they get the notice or a comment, but they can't appeal it. Only agencies like Alberta Environment, the school board, can actually make an appeal.
Okay, thank you.
Even on linear, they cannot appeal?
Or on assessment?
Yeah,
On assessment, they can. This is just for subdivision.
okay.
Well, in the sense that a landowner can appeal. Lens knows the assessment stuff far better than I.
Yeah, assessment is just done by the landowner
Yeah.
himself.
Okay.
That's sort of how things generally flow. I already mentioned this. An applicant talks with me, talks with the town, maybe both, maybe we all meet. Depending on the situation, we circulate it. I will prepare a resolution and give a recommendation to the Planning Commission. Ultimately, it's the Planning Commission who makes the decision. Again, this changed after 1995, where the Regional Planning Commission was making subdivision decisions for you. When it gets down to the decision, they of course have three options: to approve, table if they need more information, or to refuse. Did I skip one there? It must be.
Maybe you can talk about conditions.
Oh, I must just have my things back. Criteria. The question that always comes up, is the land suitable for the proposed use? In an urban municipality, it's usually pretty straightforward. It's not a grouped country residential subdivision, on the waterfront like you see the image there, where clearly they didn't account for erosion and some stuff like that. The biggest thing is whether or not the application complies with your land use bylaw. Does it meet the minimum lot size? Does it meet the maximum lot size? Are the setbacks met? Those types of things.
We have had issues with erosion at this town quite a bit in the past.
That's true. That's very true. And I mean,
Where we're allowing.
when I got here early on, I was quickly, it was baptism by fire dealing with the subdivision down to the Creek Valley for about 18 months. And I drove by there the other day, and I see, it doesn't seem like any of the lots have changed hands. So I don't know, I haven't heard from
One lot sold.
Did it?
Is it? The napkins?
I don't know who bought it.
I wasn't racing to buy one in there, I was a little nervous about the creek myself. They did do a tremendous amount of work, I see, on the creek bed, but.
Put your house on stilts and do it.
Conditions, working with attaching conditions to subdivision or development permit, that's something that, there's certainly a craft to it. And that's something that we try and assist and help the subdivision development authorities understand you know, what are typical conditions, how not to overstep your decision-making power. For example, not to sub-delegate. You don't want to say, okay, we'll approve this food establishment, provided that the health inspector is going to, you know, give his blessing to it or whatever. You're the land use authority. You have to say whether you're okay with it or not. If you need that information from the health inspector, well then get that information, but don't make it a condition of. So sometimes it's a fine line with that condition-making ability. You don't want to override a higher level of government's jurisdiction, again with things like the windmills or the large things that are dealt with provincially for the most part. You have to be careful not to overstep your jurisdiction. And conditions must be attainable. They must be finite, understandable, and able to be completed. Municipal reserve is what I generally say to people. Municipal reserve, or MR, is essentially like a tax on land development. It's the 10% requirement that municipalities use to put together lands for their school sites and for their park areas. You can also use municipal reserve to buffer between land uses. So this is dealt with at the time of subdivision. It's a 10% requirement that you'll either take 10% of the land area, then the municipality will take title to the land, or you'll take cash in lieu of that 10%. And then you have to account for that cash in lieu separately, put it in a separate bank account. You can only use it for certain things.
So Ryan, if a person has a piece of land that's had, you know, land reserve, that 10% area reserved for many, many years, and they think, geez, I'd really like that land. I want that land. Can they go in and negotiate and give them money in lieu and get the land back?
Well, to dispose of municipal reserve, there's a statutory process for that. You have to hold a public hearing, you have to post a notice on the site, you have to use the proceeds from that sale to go back in that same separate bank account, either to buy separate land for municipal reserve. Mm-hmm. So there's a
process.
Yes, there is.
It's not an easy, quick process, I'm sure.
Well, it's like any, you know, you have to hold a public hearing and do the bylaw and all that stuff. And you have to work with the school board, and there's now a mandatory requirement that you do these joint use and planning agreements. And so I'm not sure of your relationship with the school board down here, but you know, in some places, say with Paula or around the city, it's sometimes tough. You know, getting these guys to sit in the same room with you, never mind comment on a subdivision application. In my dealings with West Wind, I've always found them to be fairly, they come forward and speak to something if they need to, but now the new requirements under the Act, you have to have this agreement. It's also for the use of their schoolyards, because as I'll show you here, that 10% requirement is also for schools. And you get school reserve, where the school board says we need a new site for a school, well then you have to work, they have to come to the planning commission, who is the subdivision authority, and say, okay, we need this site, you have to work with the municipality, and then we dedicate it as school reserve as opposed to municipal reserve. But it's all within that 10% requirement. So these are the other types of reserve dedications you don't hear as much about. Environmental reserve is something a subdivision authority can take, say, adjacent to Lee Creek. We did this with the Atkins subdivision. Lands that are subject to subsidence or failure, not suitable for development, we're going to take those as environmental reserve. There's a new thing under the Act, this conservation reserve, which is for areas that aren't eligible for environmental reserve, cultural or historically significant areas, but for conservation reserve you have to compensate the landowner. Whereas for municipal reserve and environmental reserve, you can take those without compensation.
So what would be an example of an environmental reserve? I thought in my mind, but I was just wondering if it's like, you know, you got swamp up here for environmental reserve, but you have little kind of areas that got lots of bulrushes and stuff, but they got solid area all around them. They're kind of in an isolated area. Would that be like an environmental reserve, or?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people say slopes in excess of 15%.
Okay.
With low-lying areas, it's, you know, you really need to look. It's really dependent on the particulars. You'll often, if the applicant wants to say, well, no, this is suitable for development, well, we're going to need a professional opinion then from an engineer telling us, confirming the same.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if we're not sure, the more prudent way to go would probably be to take it as ER. Because in the event that, you allow development on here, and then the slope fails 20 years in the future, they're going to be looking at the municipality. Did you do your due diligence? And when you made your decision, and they always come back to the people with the deepest pockets, and it usually ends up being the municipality. The developer's long gone. Just try and finish up here. I know you got another delegation coming up quickly, so we'll probably move quickly here. 60 days, as I mentioned, then there's an appeal provision. Applicants have 1 year to register a subdivision at the land titles. The development process, development can be anything that you define it to be. Excavation, stockpiling, building a fence, or you can exempt people from the requirement to get a permit, as most bylaws do. Like here, you don't take permits for certain things, small sheds, day homes, stuff like that. Fairly consistent across the region as to how you do that.
How many extensions can we grant?
In Cardston,
Yeah.
I'd have to look at the bylaw there.
Oh,
See, there's a lot coverage requirement.
Okay.
It's written.
Yeah, it's usually a percentage of the lot area. So if you had 50 sheds at 100 square feet, you might be running into that. This is the flow chart for development permits. Again, permitted use, discretionary use. If there's one takeaway tonight with the development stuff, that's the big thing. There's 2 categories, and it's up to council to decide which land uses are appropriate where. Application requirements. It's always important that, for someone like Nolan at the front desk, he gets all the information that you need to make a decision. There's now a new 20-day requirement for determining completeness. This was something that was largely a response to the cities taking a long time. I guess an important point here, the MPC doesn't have to hold a public meeting. Most do in this region, like the town of Cardston. We hold a public meeting and people can come, but you don't have to. And you can have the first part of it open, you can kick the people out and have the rest part of it closed. Different than council meetings. One difference with development and subdivision. Subdivision, you have 60 days. Development, you have 40 days to make a decision. Just trying to finish up. Permitted use and discretionary use, that's one thing. Maybe in attaching conditions to a permitted use, you have to be careful, because a permitted use is a use by right. When someone buys a piece of property, they have to have some degree of certainty as to what they can do with it. So that's what the permitted uses are intended to be. Whereas discretionary uses, you can attach any condition under the sun, provided it's a reasonable planning-related condition. Issuing waivers, that's something we do with measurable standards. A measurable standard, anything like a setback, building height, lot coverage, and so forth. Non-conforming use or grandfathered uses. I always get questions about this stuff. What constitutes a non-conforming use? There's very specific language in the Municipal Government Act that talks about this type of thing. We're happy to answer any kind of questions like that as these matters come up, and they always do. The appeal process is the last part of this little presentation. I'll just quickly breeze through this here. We have our local appeal boards, and we have the Municipal Government Board. Again, the Municipal Government Board does appeals for subdivision, not development, where something's adjacent to where there's a provincial interest. There was one in the county not long ago, this Heritage Ranch application, I think it was, there down by the U.S. border. In that instance, the Municipal Government Board took jurisdiction. The local appeal board did not have that jurisdiction. It's a new hearing under the appeal board. That's why there's requirements for a whole new panel. Again, as I mentioned, only one councillor may now sit on an appeal board. And anything can really be appealed. Conditions or the decision itself. Stop orders are the enforcement mechanism that we use where something has been, a development's been erected, say without approval, or something's been erected that's not consistent with approval. There's differences in who can appeal what depending on subdivision development. I already talked about that.
Quick question,
Yeah.
Ryan. There's, and I'm not sure whether this is actually part of the bylaws of the town or not, but I've had people that are talking about building different properties, and they say, well, I can't build this high because it can't be any higher than the temple. Now, is that actually, no, I didn't think so, but there's a lot of little wives' tales out there, you know? But I've heard that many times.
But it's all in the land.
Yeah,
development.
There are height restrictions for, I think, every district,
yeah.
but they're not relative to the temple.
Yeah,
Good. If anybody's watching, I wanted them to have that benefit of that.
Okay. The SDAB is a bit different in that the thinking is it's more a court-like setting. It's the last line. You know, if you don't get the outcome you like at the SDAB, you can seek leave to appeal through the Court of Appeal, only under certain instances. For example, I've been dealing with the Hutterite Colony application in Vulcan County that's now in the Court of Appeal. You don't want to go there for sake of time and cost and all these different things. One can only seek leave to the Court of Appeal, which is the highest court in Alberta, if it's a matter of law or jurisdiction. Only limited circumstances where the municipal decision isn't the final decision. It's a new hearing. The board, the appeal board can change the original decision, attach any new conditions, change them. Brand new hearing de novo they call it. Administrative law is how they handle their matters to make sure everyone feels they've been dealt with fairly. And the rules of evidence. Pretty particular stuff here that's really only relevant if you're sitting on the appeal board. A lot of factors that they'll have to consider in looking at the appeal. And that's it. If you'd like me to come back or do anything in more detail, some of the stuff we rushed over here today, I'd be happy to do so. And thanks for your time.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for this presentation. It was, for me, a good refresher, for sure. And for new councillors, I'm sure it was a good first exposure to the complexity of the matter.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks to Lance also.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Any other questions that you would like to ask?
I got something for Lance. I need him to do a follow-up for me. If you would, Lance. I'll see you next Thursday night.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a very good presentation. Thank
Okay,
you.
we're going to leave here. We got to go to McGrath actually tonight too.
Well,
We're doing the double.
okay.
We're doing the Highway 5 double dip.
Yeah, me too.
You bet.
Lance,
All right.
this is the fellow that she mistook you for.
Yeah, it's Dr. Clark.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay.
Let me know, I'll come down.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you so much for all of you in the gallery, and I can see we have our next delegation, and Dr. Clark, if you like to come and present, we will have the PowerPoint presentation ready. So thank you so much for coming and present your project to us. It'll be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kronen, and thank you, councillors, for allowing us to come and represent a group of interested citizens on the subject of a Cardston and District Recreation Complex proposal. My name's Lloyd Clark, if you don't, I think I know you're pretty good, and this is Jen Smith and Greg Burt, who you also know very, very well. Can I first of all say congratulations on your election results, and it's good to see you in your positions here. I've never presented before Town Council, so pardon me if I breach any protocols. I did have a quick read on what I'm supposed to do and who I'm supposed to talk to.
You're doing just fine.
Be very nervous.
Yeah, I'm just trembling.
It's just fine. If you want to understand a little bit of the process of when you do a presentation, at the end of the presentation, councillors will be given the opportunity to ask you questions. We will not offer comments. We will not praise your presentation or whatever, because we try to be without bias. But at a certain time during our meeting, we will review what you have presented and try to make decisions or table decisions. It depends. All right? So essentially, that's a process.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So as a interested citizen of the community, and also wearing the hat as president of the Blue and White Club, which is the Alumni Association of Cardston High School, I've been privy to a lot of conversations with various people over the years about the concept of expanding, improving, and developing perhaps a better facility for some sports and activities. And then this kind of, the seed germinated, so to speak, in conversation with a variety of people. One of them is one of our councillors here, Councillor Selk, and came up with some thoughts that he was very positive about, and I hope you don't mind me saying so. And then we developed them further and talked to a bunch of people and came up with the following. So the first thing is why bother? Well, I hope you'll appreciate that this is not about a sports stadium, but this is about a rec complex, a recreation complex, which can be something that all the citizens of the community and the area could enjoy. But why bother doing anything? I think the real answer for me is it's about families. Several years ago, Dal Zemp and Clay Levitt were bombarded with people in the community saying, you need to bring business to the town, we need to build up our industry and so forth. And they did a good try. I think that the culture of, if you don't mind me saying so, of people that live in our community is a little different than it was 20 and 30 years ago, in that I myself commute to Lethbridge, and in fact a car in my house goes to Lethbridge nearly every day of the week. The families of our society are far more willing to commute. What I'm getting at is that if dad commutes for his job in Lethbridge and mom works somewhere in town, they would do that in order to live in the community where they want to raise their children. And I know this from talking with families who do that. They would sacrifice those hours of commuting, because my son-in-law lives in Calgary and his commute is 45 minutes, and that's within the city of Calgary. So as we think about what we want to do to build the community, I don't think it's reasonable for us, we're at the end of a line. We're not going to get a factory built here to build major industry, but we will get people, and that's where we can really make a difference. So what attracts people to live in a community? Recreation facilities attract people. Why do we want to live here? Because we can have our kids do stuff that's enriching. I live here because I love to work here, but I also love that my children are educated, for one thing, by people who share similar values, and that I can raise a family in a community where the whole community knows who my children are. So that's why I think a rec facility for our community has a very big positive thing. Consider the scenario that in April and May, or even March in some years, people are out walking again. And that's fantastic. But why? And it's a shame that they're limited to being able to walk. If we had a recreational facility where we could have a walking track in it that could be used by everybody 24/7, 365 days a year, not just for 4 to 5 months when the wind isn't blowing. Indoor bowls. We have people, citizens, who go out and mow a portion of the town square and set up their own indoor bowls area, or outdoor bowls area. What a great initiative they show. A pickleball court. We have a group of seniors who are very interested, and they play pickleball at a church. But the court isn't rules. It's not the right size, and so their ability to excel is compromised, and the club could be so much better. An exercise facility. We have a great gym under the swimming pool, and it's run by and membership is 100 people. But you can't get there if you're scared of stairs, because it's precarious if you've ever been in there. Gymnastics. We have, Jen, is it 100 or more, 300 or more youth involved?
365.
365 youth are involved in gymnastics in our community, and they are in this very facility. That equipment is an example, and this isn't what I think we should have. Jen would be an expert in that area. But it's unfortunate that the gymnastics people, the volunteers who are part of the program, have to take their equipment down constantly. And I worry about the liability that's associated with that. Bolts are missed, an apparatus falls down, and somebody's injured. That could be the end of a program. If they had a standalone facility, that would prevent that from being an issue. 3 major sports use a facility like a field and a stadium. Football between the months of August to November, rugby March to June, track and field April to May. Our own Councillor Brown has great experience with the problems of our football field, and so I won't go into too much detail except for to tell you that we are losing the opportunity to have teams come here to play because of our status of our field. I know that it's a complex agreement with Westwind School Division, but I have assurances from them that were the town and county to partnership together, there could be some great strides in improving that. I'm also aware that Greg has presented for the council and mayor the cost analysis of what it would take to refurbish the track. I don't think that included the field at that point.
No.
But and that's where I want to be clear. I think this is more than just a stadium, a sports stadium for football. Currently, you can't have a rugby game and a baseball game at the same time because the fields cross, and it's unsafe to have a fence right in the middle of a rugby field, which is essentially what would happen. So the baseball team can't function when there's a rugby game, and that's complicating. The soccer group, we know of the great energy which the soccer association has had in the community and the wonderful job that Stacey Atwood and her board have done in creating the facility there, and the fantastic support of town and council for that. There's an interest in indoor soccer, and any facility that didn't include that prospective thing would be amiss. Other facilities that would be imperative for a project of this magnitude would be having storage rooms for each respective sport. Right now, track and field has the track and field coach uses his own personal trailer to store the gear and transports it every day they have practice down to the field and home again, making sure because of his own self-interest that stuff is taken care of properly. One of the big problems with our current football field is the referees have nowhere to change. They don't even want to be here, and that is discouraging for a team. There's no changing rooms for teams when they visit. I coach rugby. Last season, after being tired of having young ladies have to change their jerseys, because in rugby you can't just wear any number, you got to wear the right number if you're going on the field. So when they sub, they often have to change jerseys. Having to do that in front of fans and young men and others is not proper. So we erected a tarp between the trees because that's the best we could do. Any complex of this nature would be silly if it didn't have multi-purpose rooms in it. Rooms that could be on 1 month conference rooms, on another time exercise classes. We have a Taekwondo club that's formed with 30 to 40 members already, and Chris Haas and his wife Sonia are chief people in that. The ability for that program to expand and grow is great, and there would be revenue for the rental they would have. Right now they're renting a private place to have that class. If we had the goal of being able to host events like high school football provincials, then we would need to be able to have the facilities to support that, and a stadium with attached rooms, conference rooms, changing areas, referee, and all sorts would be part of that program. I don't know if there's ever been a cost and a income estimate from the provincials for basketball that have been held here in the community, but it's immense. When you hold basketball provincials, you're bringing in roughly 32 teams to the community, more than we have in hotel rooms for that weekend. And provincials is a 4-day event. That's a lot of players, not including all their families who come to watch. Football is twice that size because a football team has over 30 players on it. So you're talking about a lot of people that need to eat, need to sleep, and need to buy snack food and groceries. That is revenue for our community. In thinking about this, I've contemplated who the stakeholders are, but I'm new at this and I haven't done this sort of thing before. I see the stakeholders as being the town, of course, the county as well, Westwind School Division, and us as citizens. We have a group of citizens that are willing to be involved and energetic. 2 weeks ago, we held a meeting and we gathered together, and I will send a list of all of those that are participating in that. They represent all of the sports and areas that I've given you, everything apart from seniors. But Mr. Burt is attending the seniors meeting, and he will be attracting volunteers from that group to be part of this organization, should it have any bear fruit and go forward. I've already had informal conversations with Westwind School Division, and I can tell you that they committed to Raymond for the sports stadium that Raymond built a sum of $300,000. And informally, they've agreed that they would be obliged to provide any other community that came up with a similar idea the same amount of money. I'm also aware of the county, and I've talked to a couple of the new county councillors, and I'll be making a presentation to them as well on the same basis. I'm aware of the disparity that's existed for many, many years between what the county consume as its citizens use the facilities that town taxpayers provide with very little input financially. That concerns me. I hope the council has some energy to pursue that and rectify that. And I think that proposing that the county could in good faith show support for this in something more than just getting a digger out and donating some gravel, that appeals to me. And we have representation on the group of citizens involved of 4 county citizens who would be pressuring their councillors to do the right thing. As we see it as a group, the next steps are many. I've had lots of people call me in the last week worried about where we're going to put this, as if we're about to dig ground next week. And I've had to slow everybody down and say, just a minute, we don't even know what the right thing looks like. We're talking about it. This is a feasibility level. I don't know if it should be on the east hill, the south hill, or the north hill. Let's talk about what it looks like first. And so that's what we're doing. But the next steps appear to me to start costing a little bit of money. And we need one of our stakeholders to take an interest and to sponsor such a concept. Given that the town has proven to be so responsible in all of these areas in the past, perhaps the town is a good candidate to sponsor an event or the feasibility of such a thing. Any type of sponsorship would involve a cost analysis of all the potential parts, identifying the proposals to look at different locations and why and what's to gain from each of those. And then obviously engaging architectural firms to explore building options. However, all of that costs money. Mayor Kronen, I hope that you'll see the merits in a project like this, that you'll see that we can grow our community by creating a recreation complex that cause people to say, I want to live in Cardston, I want to raise my kids in Cardston, not just because it has good schools or it's where I like to go to church, but because we have facilities that will keep children and athletes and citizens busy all of their lives. We have a large seniors group in our community. I went to an informal thing, and I just mentioned it briefly at their luncheon they had last 2 weeks ago. And there was a furor of excitement as I threw out the concept of them being able to exercise and attend these facilities. I know there's concerns about taxes and mill rates, and can we maintain such an extravagant proposal? I think we can, and I think that if we have the confidence to build it, we'll be surprised at how much it gets used and how much it is a positive for our community. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you so much for this very enlightening presentation. It's a breath of fresh air. And what I would ask you maybe to help us a little bit understand where we have next steps. So here is a little bit of a reflection. You correctly mentioned that the county in the past has maybe not come at the proper level of participation with our recreation facility. So what we heard in the past when we had a shared service review was the following. We were not at the table when you planned the construction or the concept of a sports facility. Now you want us to pay for it. So I want to avoid the same kind of dilemma, especially because now we are mandated to have integrated shared service plan. And so I see your next step, you see, you want the town to be a sponsor. I'm wondering if the concept wouldn't be better to have a joint sponsorship with the county in order to avoid the mistakes of the past. So that is maybe something you may want to consider when you do the presentation at the county, to see what the appetite at sitting together and sharing those preliminary costs as a show of goodwill toward the development of such a concept. Does it make sense?
That is a brilliant idea.
Thank you. I was not trying to be great, I was trying to be fair.
And I'm not being flattering.
Thank you.
I'll explore that with them.
Yeah, I just think we really need to be on equal footing and have them in the equation.
Thank you.
Councillors, do you have questions?
Presentation.
I know it's unusual for me to ask, but just so I'm clear, there is a group meeting, so loosely organized with a common interest. I'm curious about how you foresee maybe this group formalizing. So obviously there's going to be some interaction with the town and the county and the West Wind, and so that's the elected officials getting involved at different levels. I'm just curious what we see maybe the constitution of this group is going forward, because sometimes when they're loose like this, they can lose steam. There's not any continuity as people get on other responsibilities or have to do other things. So I wouldn't maybe mind some understanding if we can help put that together in some way.
Right, and I think, as you know, right now we have a Parks and Rec. We have a councillor that is the bridge between Parks and Rec and the council. And so I would see that would be probably one of the persons that you would want to be on your side to move the concept forward.
I'm not on their side, is that what you said? Okay.
No, I mean as part of a commission or as part of a group, working group. If that is a person you need, I think council would appreciate the fact that not only does Paula have, Councillor Brown has experience with certain aspect of fundraising, etc., but also a fairly great passion into that department.
I'd be happy to work with you.
That's great. Thank you.
Councillor Bengry.
So Dr. Clark, you're looking at basically going forward, you're going to need a feasibility study. Is that right?
In my naivete, I think so, but I'll take direction in whatever is the next steps to proceed. I like the concept of formalizing the committee. I have just taken it upon myself because I've heard so many people talk about I wish, and I never saw any fruit of the I wishes, so I just said, well, somebody's got to step up, so I did. I'm happy to continue in whatever capacity any group formally becomes. But I agree with the concern. We need to have an established situation. And feasibility study is probably what we need to do, something like that.
Councillor, sorry.
I don't know, I guess I'm looking for clarification too, because I agreed to speak to the seniors group next Tuesday about this concept, so I can back away from it. Council around if you'd like.
Well, you can join hands, there's nothing wrong
It's at
with
9 o'clock in the morning.
doing the presentation. There's, Jeff, do you want to add something?
No, I had nothing.
Is Dr. Clark going to be there with you?
No, I
Okay,
can't
so
do it at that time.
you're bringing that as yourselves, as representing the town and the interest, possibly.
When I initially agreed to this, Mayor, I wasn't necessarily representing the town, I was representing the group,
The
because I went to that
All right.
meeting.
Okay, so which hat are you going to go there with?
A bowler.
Okay, so essentially you have the councillor hat and you have the citizen hat. You will have to decide which one it is you go there.
even though I'm not quite there yet. I think it's
Well, you only get to
All right,
55.
okay, so essentially you have one councillor assigned to your group and you will need to kind of keep her abreast of when the meetings are.
Yes.
And she has some time restrictions, so you will need to work that out.
So we can discuss the Constitution here a little bit later and what fits. We've got some models we've done in the past that may work,
Yes.
but we can discuss that after the
Right,
delegation.
and maybe Dr. Clark, if you want to have some discussion with Jeff, might be helpful regarding the governance of your group, possibly. That might be a good resource for you.
I was wondering, a question to Jeff, is there any kind of grant or starter money to help to get this kind of thing going that we as a town could apply for to help out with?
Not that I'm aware of.
Maybe you should
The
look at
only
it.
thing maybe is, and again, we can discuss this a little more thoroughly, but ACP, where it's an intermunicipal collaboration type of piece, and if we're only
Yeah.
looking not for the capital portion, but by the way, I think whatever this committee does, the deliverable should be the feasibility study, that's the
Yeah.
goal.
Yes.
And so that needs to be the goal of whatever constitutes the group, is the feasibility study. There may be some
Yeah, that's what I was
ACP because it's a
thinking.
multi-jurisdictional
Kickstart budget
piece. We just have to investigate that a little
Yeah.
further. I don't know, I don't think there's any slam dunks, but there may be some fringe
Okay.
grant.
All right, Councillor Selk?
Jeff, last week we learned about the federal government's cultural and recreation
Yeah,
fund.
there is quite a bit of money.
There's at least $140 million in there. Maybe they'll toss us up on.
That's not one I'm familiar with, but can certainly get up to speed.
Yeah,
It was
They were just talking.
just announced?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, it was.
Mayor Kronen, may I ask another question?
Please.
In what capacity can I represent the town's thoughts on this to the county?
Okay, so here, do you remember at the beginning of my discussion, we said you would make a presentation? We need a little bit of time to absorb that. When are you going to the county?
I've asked to be put onto their next county meeting agenda, which I believe is December the 11th.
Okay, so we have a,
Week and a half.
Or the day after. Well, we can discuss it later tonight.
okay, we have a little bit of a time frame, interesting dilemma, but I'm sure it can be overcome.
My feelings are that there's no need to rush anything,
I appreciate that.
and I would rather do it right than do it quickly.
And I really appreciate that because right now we're looking at the concept and starting to give a little bit of wings to a concept. So we want to go thoroughly. That would be the best way to put it.
So just a question is, so are you thinking in your head, like, do you have like a 5-year plan, a 3-year plan? Logistically in your head, what are you thinking? You've talked to people, what are their thoughts? I mean, it's not gonna happen within a year, right? What realistically, where are you at in that?
So I see, and I haven't shared this with anybody, but I see a hope that we could be digging in 5 years. And I say 5 years because I think if we look realistically at what it takes to put together the committee and to get the county on board and all the stakeholders invested, and I'm also drawing upon the experience of Raymond, that they were between 3 to 5 years in preparing before they got, it took them 5 years to get their facility from the time they started, so.
I'm glad you brought that up because we were just at AUMA and we talked to Raymond in regards to their complex and we're just quizzing them and that's exactly what they said. They said, realistically, you think it's not gonna take that long, but it took them 3 to 5 years and they, okay, good, thank you.
And I would imagine then putting everything in the most rosy of color, those 5 years will be used to not only plan and really give more structure to the whole idea, but will also be a time where you fundraise and apply for grants. I would imagine that would be part of the plan.
Spitballing it, we talked about it as a group, and every participant that would hope to be part of it would have an opportunity to fundraise over those years and collect their money and formalize their situation so that they have their own bylaws, rules, restrictions, secretaries, treasurers and such. And we have a few of them that are already not-for-profits who can access grants.
Okay, so that's an interesting concept when you say not-for-profit. When I look at your partners, you have the town, the county, the West Wind, and citizens. But I'm wondering, have you ever thought of clubs in a town, as the Rotary, the Lions, who also have capacity to apply for funding under different kind of rules, and might be of help? I know that they love to do projects for the town, but I think wouldn't it be a wonderful thing to do a presentation over there to help them see the value in joining hands?
Thank you.
Just another thought.
It's a very good thought. I'll expand on that with them.
Thank you. Councillor Bengry?
Dr. Clark, the presentation was excellent. You know where you want to go with this facility. In my mind, your next move would be a feasibility study.
Well, that's what we kind of
You know,
pushing.
yeah, location and everything else. That's the only thing.
Okay. All right, we're going to
I'm gonna
leave
throw
it
an
up to
idea.
you.
I was just throwing an idea before you wrap up.
Go ahead.
I was on the fundraising group to get our new library. I was on the building committee from the bottom up. And there's a lot of people here in town that are looking for places to put family monies, family groups. So you might want to look at some of those groups. There's lots of them. And they love to be able to get involved because they've got money that they can put in memory of their ancestors, and that would be they could name a conference room, or they could name the gymnasium, and it's amazing how you can get that money together if you go that way.
And there's a lot of philanthropists
Yeah, that's
in
what I'm saying.
Alberta that are also looking for places to donate.
Yeah. But for people that are former residents that are out there, they're thinking they love their town. Well, now how much do you love it? We're going to do this, and those are things that we can do.
All right, Councillor Brown?
No, I was just going to say, he knows that because you've done the blue and white and you get money for scholarships and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But I mean, the soccer park was started with $74,000 from the Simpson brothers, right? So it just takes, yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
All right.
Matching grants.
So thank you so much for all your thought, and thank you so much for this very futuristic presentation, but hopefully I'll gain momentum and legs on the ground.
Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On break.
Yes, we will break at this point and take a little bit of a supper break. Thank you. I need a motion, please.
I make a motion. So we make a separate.
Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. We
We bless the food.
going to try to reconvene around 7. Councillor Brown, would you like to bless the food for us?